Tonight, a community in shock. Investigations continue into the fire at a hotel in Perth, which left 3 people dead.
At this time of year, your thoughts are with family and things like that. And then if you hear it, 3 people plus the dog dead, and you can smell it in the air even now. The smoke.
It's 2 days later. It's quite alarming.
Also making the headlines, the crisis in the NHS. As an emergency medic warns the pressures are like dealing with a major incident in slow motion, we speak live to the National Clinical Director. Return of the rail strikes. The new year brings more industrial action as the RMT dispute with Network Rail goes on. And seasonal sustainability, why recycling your Christmas tree is proving a popular New Year resolution. I'm Gordon Cree. This is the STV News at 6, live across Scotland. Good evening. Guests at the hotel in Perth, where 3 people died in a fire, had expressed concerns about faulty electrics and the use of fan heaters in rooms. Investigations into the cause of the blaze at the new county hotel are continuing tonight. Susan Nicholson has been at the scene throughout today and is there for us now. Susan.
Yes, we've been able to get fairly close to the building today as the surrounding roads have reopened, and we can see some of the damage. A tarpaulin covers the burnt out windows on the 2nd floor where early yesterday morning, Monday the 2nd of January, a deadly blaze took hold. One that the fire service says was complex and extremely challenging to bring under control. Now today I've been speaking to some of the survivors, some of those who fled the burning building, and they've been telling me of their traumatising experiences. Inside the hotel, intense activity continues as police and fire investigators probe the possible cause of the fire and try to piece together what went so tragically wrong. The terrifying scenes at Perth's New County Hotel early yesterday morning. At its height, 60 firefighters tackled the blaze and rescued guests. On extinguishing the flames at around 6:30, 3 people and a dog were found dead on the 2nd floor.
Just that very horrible. We can't sleep and we go, that's how the people suffer in the fire because it's very difficult.
Guests have told how they fled after hearing the alarm. One woman I've spoken to was in a room directly below the seat of the fire. She says she smelled smoke, realised it was an emergency. Then she and her husband left as quickly as they could. Today, she says she feels shocked and traumatised on learning that 3 people lost their lives. Some guests have told STV News that in recent weeks they'd reported concerns about faulty electrics to the hotel management and that fan heaters were being used in bedrooms. The police and fire service say their investigation is at an early stage and they're looking at all possible causes.
I would encourage anybody who's had any concerns to come forward to express those concerns to the authorities to make sure that they can be fully taken into account as the circumstances are examined. Fire death in Scotland is actually very rare, so when it happens it's absolutely shocking and we have to learn what has happened to make sure that we avoid similar circumstances in the future.
In Perth today, there was shock and sympathy.
Awful, heartbreaking as well because I've got a dog as well, terrible.
At this time of year, your thoughts are with family and things like that. And then if you hear it, 3 people plus the dog dead, and you can smell it in the air even now. The smoke.
It's 2 days later. Yeah. It's quite alarming.
Well, it's very sad because it is the new year and it's just not something you would you wouldn't expect at this time of the year, would you?
15 guests who were evacuated from the hotel have been placed in alternative accommodation by the council. Surrounding roads have reopened, but the hotel building remains sealed off. as the hunt for answers to this New Year tragedy continues. Susan Nicholson, STV News, Perth.
Next tonight, Scotland's NHS is dealing with the equivalent of a major incident playing out slowly across the whole country, according to a leading emergency medic. The Vice President of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine says overcrowded A&E departments are operating in dangerous conditions, and he estimates that long delays are leading to an extra 50 deaths a week.
The ambulance queues are not patients who shouldn't be coming to hospital. It's not patients with sore ears or twisted ankles or patients who should have chosen differently. This is the frail, elderly, vulnerable population who come by ambulance either because they're very unwell or because they're so frail that they require the ambulance's support to get them to hospital. Many of those patients are in their 80s and 90s. They are the least able to spend 3 or 4 hours in a frigid ambulance.
Well, to discuss the current pressures on the health service, I'm joined by Scotland's National Clinical Director, Professor Jason Leach. Professor Leach, we've heard there a very vivid picture from inside the NHS, but is it one you recognise?
It is. I know John Paul very well. I spent some time in an emergency room last week. I speak to my colleagues pretty much every day. It is one I recognise, and it's really hard. It's hard, principally, of course, for patients and families and those who are having to deal with getting care, and we'll come to how you might do that a bit more efficiently shortly, perhaps, but also for those who are working in the whole system. Not just in our accident and emergency departments, but in our GP practices, our care homes, our care at home services. The whole thing feels really, really under pressure.
Why is it so bad?
Well, this weekend is always bad. If you have a 4-day bank holiday weekend, twice in a row, it's always bad. On top of that, we've layered COVID. So COVID has not gone away. I would love to say it has. We've also now, we know, got a very bad flu season. That's unpredictable. That changes from year to year. But we went from what we class as moderate to severe in a week. And that causes harm for the people John Paul was talking about, principally the frail elderly. And we've also got strep A in the young and in the elderly. And we've got backlog. So those 3 things all layered on top of each other mean that we've got an under pressure health and care system. What the kernel of that, the kind of core of that is A&E. That's because that's the place that's always open, always available. It's always where people can go. So that's why you get the headlines from those places.
Is this the worst you've ever seen it in all your time in the health service?
It certainly feels harder than it's felt for a long number of years. I mean, you can't really compare it to the COVID waves where it felt very different, but the health service felt as though it was under pressure that was historical, like centuries of uniqueness. This feels like a very, very bad winter, but let's not get too helpless or hopeless. There are things we can do. There are things, of course, that the politicians can do. There are things that the senior advisors can do in advice, but there's also things that the public can do, and it's important that we help the public understand how to use the health service wisely.
And what are the things we can do?
So I think there's 3 principal things you and I and everybody we know can do. The first is to stay off if you're sick. It sounds awfully simple, doesn't it? But if your kid is not well, or you're not well, or you're heading back to work this week as a bus driver or an office worker, or just think about that. Think about not spreading the disease you might have to somebody else, flu, a respiratory virus or COVID. The second thing you could do is use the health service wisely. The first place you should go is NHS Inform. That's our website. It has all the self-care advice you would need, but it also tells you when you should escalate to other care, community pharmacy, GP practice, NHS 24. 9 out of 10 people who phone NHS 24 get their care dealt with in one call. Now, people are now yelling at the TV saying, I can't get through. Yes, you have to be patient. It's taking a long time. 12 or 15,000 people a day phoning NHS 24 this winter. So be patient, but we will get to you and we will give you good advice. The third thing that you can do is, along with the 800,000 unpaid carers in this country, is you can care. You can care for those around you.
Just briefly, there was a time where you and I talked about COVID, what seemed like every day. We don't now, but we all seem to know someone who's had it, or flu, or a bad cold, or a child with strep A. Where are we with these viruses and bugs right now?
Yeah, we're in a difficult position because we've got 3 layered on top of each other. So we've got COVID. We've got about 700-800 people in hospital with COVID, with other diseases as well, frail, elderly, like John Paul talked about. Flu is what's worrying us most, though. The COVID vaccine is working remarkably well to keep people away from hospital and severe disease. That doesn't mean it's not a problem. It is a problem, particularly for people who are off work, in the health and care system, for example, or in the fire service, or in education. But flu is a big, big problem. If you haven't had your flu vaccine, there is still time to protect yourself, because the flu season will continue for another number of weeks.
OK, Professor Jason Leach, thank you very much for giving us that insight.
Thank you.
Now, union leaders say cool heads and brave hearts are needed to bring to an end the long-running rail dispute. The vast majority of services were brought to a standstill once again today as members of the RMT union staged their latest walkout over pay and conditions. It's the first of 2 48-hour strikes this week, with members due to walk out again on Friday. Here's our political correspondent, Ewan Petrie.
Victory time!
A new year, but a familiar rallying call outside Scotland's railway stations. In a dispute that began last June, some passengers are also growing used to dealing with the disruption.
Just need to get a bus. It's not ideal, but we just have to get the bus if there's no trains, yeah.
That's fine, no problem. No, we just check the train times before to make sure we're on time.
The strike action continues into tomorrow, with another 2-day walkout planned for Friday and Saturday. It's severely limiting services, with ScotRail operating just 12 routes. Passengers also face disruption on Thursday.
The RMT currently has a mandate to continue these strikes until May, when it would have to reballot its members. These workers say they are prepared to take action beyond that if they don't get an offer from Network Rail they consider acceptable.
It's a fight of our lives, a fight not of our making, a fight imposed on us, or a fight brought to us by the executives and the train operating companies and Network Rail and the UK government. But our members know their jobs aren't for sale and their working practices and conditions aren't for sale. So what we really need is cool heads and brave hearts, sit round a table and resolve this.
The UK government today called on the RMT to get off the picket line and back round the negotiating table.
Network Rail has said that a deal is within touching distance. Is it?
Well, we're very keen to find a resolution to this dispute. We're very keen to work with the RMT and strike a bargain that's fair for both their members and also for the taxpayer who ultimately funds the railway. At the moment, we're offering the RMT a 9% pay rise, no compulsory redundancies. That's been accepted by 2 other unions that represent Network Rail staff, and we'd like to reach a resolution with the RMT too.
Flood damage on the West Coast main line near Carstairs is causing further disruption for passengers. The route is not expected to reopen until Friday at the earliest. Ewan Petrie, STV News.
A father of 4 who was told he had almost no hope of walking again says he's amazed at the progress he's made within weeks of starting innovative therapy. Luke Loudon, who was paralysed following a car crash, is the first patient in Scotland to benefit from the 0G balance system at the Queen Elizabeth National Spinal Injuries Unit in Glasgow. Luke has been speaking to our chief reporter, Sharon Frew.
Each step is a milestone for Luke Loudon, who was told after a car crash he had a slim chance of ever regaining any movement in his legs. The 0G gait and balance system means the 32-year-old is fully supported while working with a single physiotherapist. The equipment automatically synchronises with Luke's movements.
Okay, let's go again.
His weight is supported by an overhead track, giving him the confidence to push himself to the limit without fear of falling.
Take 2 more steps.
I used to be fit before, but never been this tired after something so simple to most people. Obviously it was really hard at the start because my limbs didn't know what to do. And they know when you're struggling as well, and they just push it a little bit further. But they're amazing here.
A lot of our patients would be dizzy, lightheaded because of the types of injuries they've had. This device allows patients to work at a higher intensity earlier in their rehab without the risk of falling over. And when you're talking about a length of stay of 3 or 4 months, if we can get patients up on their feet more confidently earlier, that means getting home sooner.
Move forward, and a big push up.
Luke was only a few hundred yards from his home in Dumfries and Galloway when he lost control of his car and hit a tree. He says he knew instantly he was paralysed. After the crash in August 2020, Luke was able to leave hospital in time for his youngest son's first birthday the following December.
So was that the first time on the bars?
Yep. This video was taken around the start of the 12-week programme. Before this therapy, Luke was struggling to move his feet during sessions in the pool.
There's been a huge difference. I could hardly move my feet in the water to now being able to walk on the bars 20 metres without stopping.
Did you ever think that you would make that progress?
No. I don't think I'll make any progress. I'm happy if I gain anything back, bonus, but if I don't, I'm happy with what I've got. It means I can stand at home and just do things a bit easier. Nerve pain in my legs gone down, my spasms, they've decreased again. I sleep better. Mentally, it's made quite a big difference too.
We have, unfortunately, in Scotland, we have over 120 patients who have a bad spinal cord injury every year in Scotland and need to be admitted to this unit. And about 75% of those would be patients who this device might be appropriate for.
I wouldn't have got through this at all without my wife. She's an absolute star. She knows obviously I've made progress, but I don't know if she knows actually how much I've made. Well, it would be a nice surprise.
More rehabilitation lies ahead, building on Luke's progress and his newfound confidence. Sharon Frew, STV News.
Other stories across Scotland, and a bomb squad staged a controlled explosion after the discovery of a suspicious package at Edinburgh's Central Mosque this morning. Mosque leaders said the building was evacuated after police officers reviewed CCTV. Police say the item posed no risk to the public. An investigation is being carried out after a man's body was found in the grounds of a care home in Glasgow's south side. The man was found outside Chester Park care home in Kinning Park on Boxing Day. Inquiries are ongoing into the circumstances surrounding his death. The Scottish guitarist Alan Rankin, who was part of the rock band The Associates in the early 1980s, has died, aged 64. He was also a successful music producer and helped set up a record label for students in Glasgow, which launched the careers of Belle and Sebastian and Snow Patrol. Now, old newspapers are a vital tool for historical research, containing a wealth of information about the country down the years. But that's being put at risk. The National Library of Scotland is warning almost 2/3 of its newspaper archive could be lost if urgent funding isn't secured. It's launching an appeal to raise money and save the collection. Indigo Stafford reports.
Offering a unique window into Scotland's past, the National Library in Edinburgh is home to a newspaper archive that dates back from as early as 1641.
The amount of stories, history, social history that is in these papers are so unique and rich in content. We have nothing like it, and in most cases, they are only copy, and so we have to preserve our Scottish history as soon as possible.
The collection has over 1,000 different titles, including the first ever edition of The Scotsman.
This room holds hundreds of years of history, told through millions of pages of newspapers, but the library fears that it could all be erased.
Preserving the papers is a painstaking and pricey process, and that's why the library is seeking donations through their Save Scotland's Newspapers appeal.
What newspaper do we have here?
So we have the Highland News from 1901, and the majority of it has been disbound and conserved, as you can see here, but the last few pages are in a poorer state. So in this case, we have some creasing in the corner and a lot of brittle folded edges that are getting in the way of the text, which means we cannot capture it. But if you use something like water in a very controlled manner, such as a very small particle mist, the paper along this edge will relax and we will be able to repair those tears and those creases, flattening the edge and allowing capture to happen.
The library fear they are fighting a losing battle, but say every penny raised will be put towards treating tears and digitising the pages. Indigo Stafford, STV News, Edinburgh.
Now, while many of us have been enjoying a break over the festive season, Scottish football has been all action. Ronnie's here with tonight's sport.
Get your fill of the action. STV Sport, sponsored by Papa John's Pizza.
Good evening. Celtic captain Callum McGregor says they showed tremendous character in their 2-2 draw with rivals Rangers, maintaining their 9-point lead at the top of the Scottish Premiership. Meanwhile, despite conceding a late equaliser, Ibrox defender Ben Davies says the team are only going one way under new manager Michael Beale, and that is forward. It was the goal which rescued Celtic from Derby Day defeat. The goal which kept the champions 9 clear at the summit of the Premiership. And the goal which the Parkhead skipper says showed what they're all about.
Yeah, I think in the end, good character again by the group to keep going, even though things were against us in terms of performance levels, weren't quite at the races. But it's important that, you know, when things aren't going against you, you show mental strength, and we get the one chance, and Kyogo does really well to finish. So, you know, like you said, positive in the end, considering the performance.
For Rangers boss Michael Beale, he admits it was an opportunity wasted to close the gap at the top. Despite the early setback of Daisen Maeda's opener, Beale says his team's fight back in the second half shows they're heading in the right direction. The Ibrox boss is adamant the gap between Celtic and Rangers isn't as big as many believe. And the Ibrox dressing room agrees.
I think since the manager's come in, is made it clear that we're going in one direction, and that's forward, and we're not going to stand off anyone, and we're going to show who Rangers are, and he wants to take us back to when he was obviously at the club before, and some of the performances that the boys were putting in, and I think that's kind of what we're trying to do going forward.
So the result means it's as you were at the top of the Premiership. Celtic 9 clear of Rangers with a vastly superior goal difference of +20. Next up for Ange Postecoglou's side is the visit of Kilmarnock on Saturday, before Rangers head to Tannadice to face Dundee United on Sunday afternoon. Staying with football, and Hearts have confirmed defender Craig Halkett will miss the rest of the season after suffering a cruciate ligament injury. The news comes as Hearts beat Edinburgh rivals Hibs 3-0 at Tynecastle to strengthen their position in third. Lawrence Shanklin scored twice, including this penalty, before Stephen Humphreys added a third in stoppage time. The result heaps yet more pressure on Hibs boss Lee Johnston. They remain 8th, 7 points off the bottom of the table. Aberdeen manager Jim Goodwin says he will not panic despite his Dons team only taking 1 point out of a possible 15 since the World Cup break. Aberdeen failed to break down Ross County with the match finishing goalless. Matty Kennedy with the best chance, but this effort was cleared off the line. Goodwin revealed that there will be new signings during the January window, with defensive options the priority.
Well, listen, we recognise obviously the fans' frustration. As I said, you know, we feel it as well, and you know, supporters up and down the land are all very similar. You know, when their teams are winning, they're happy with what they're seeing, and when the teams aren't winning and aren't picking up points, then they're not long in letting you know about it. So our supporters obviously showing their frustration and disappointment at the end of the game. You know, I hope it's not aimed towards the players, because I think the players showed a lot of commitment and effort. I would imagine it's more aimed my way, which is part and parcel of the game. You know, that's the game we're in.
Yeah, it was a frustrating day. I can't fault anyone's performance. Our attitude, our mentality towards the game was a lot different to when we played Kilmarnock, and all we can ask for is a reaction. We wanted the result. Wasn't clinical at the other end, and ultimately that's what gave us the 0-0 draw today.
Livingston boss David Martindale believes his side were spooked after Nicky Devlin missed twice from the spot in their 1-1 draw with Motherwell. Goalkeeper Liam Kelly saved Devlin's initial spot kick, but after the rebound was judged to have been put in by his hand, he was ordered to retake and missed again. Morgan Boys did eventually give Livy the lead, but just 3 minutes later, Kevin Van Veen equalised for the Steelmen. Finally, Liam Fox has hailed his team's spirit of the Dundee United players as they made it 2 wins in a row with a 1-0 victory over St Johnstone. Tony Watt scored the only goal of the game 8 minutes from time, meaning United are now 3 points clear of bottom side Ross County. Elsewhere, St Mirren boss Stephen Robinson was proud of his team's resilience after they held Kilmarnock to a goalless draw with 10 men. Ethan Errahon seeing red for this elbow after just 7 minutes. Last bit of news from us tonight, Cove Rangers have sacked manager Jim McIntyre after they suffered a 6-1 defeat to Inverness yesterday. That's all your sport from me tonight, folks. We're back same time tomorrow.
Get your fill of the action. STV Sports, sponsored by Papa John's Pizza.
Yellow weather warnings for heavy rain remain in place tonight for large parts of Scotland. The advice is it could lead to localised flooding and potential travel disruption. Sean has the forecast.
Good visibility on the horizon. Sponsors STV Weather.
A very good evening to you, and if I haven't seen you before now, well, a very happy new year. Now, of course, during Christmas and New Year in the US, Canada, they had some extreme cold weather, extreme snowfall as well, historic in places, and that's injected a lot more energy into the jet stream. It broke the back of the settled weather we had in December, and now we're back to typical winter fare for us. Wet, windy, at times stormy weather, lots of rain to come as well for the foreseeable. So I'm afraid some flooding issues possible, and as I said, some stormy conditions. Looks as if it's going to be that way on and off really for the next couple of weeks. And also quite mild as well, very mild out there tonight. Temperatures around 10 degrees in central and southern parts. That's 50 degrees in Fahrenheit, so incredibly mild for the time of year. And wet for most of us through the night as well. Band of rain moving its way northwards, a very far northwest, probably staying driest through the night. Then into tomorrow we'll have windy weather around Shetland and Orkney, the very far northeast coast as well, but elsewhere the wind's light, a lot of dry and bright weather from the central belt northwards, although there will be some scattered showers in the northwest. We'll see some outbreaks of rain affecting Ayrshire, Lanarkshire, Dumfries and Galway, the borders through much of the day. Highs about 9 or 10 degrees, so the temperatures through tonight into tomorrow afternoon staying roughly the same. Then on Thursday, the brightest weather across northern areas, very far north of the country. Elsewhere, we start to see wind and rain returning. Bye-bye.
TUI sponsors STV Weather.
And finally, it's not quite the 12th day of Christmas, but many of us are already taking the decorations down. And if you've had a real tree, the question is, how do you get rid of it? Selina Jackson's been finding out.
Over the next few days, this pile of trees is likely to get much bigger. This park in Glasgow is one of dozens across the country starting to collect them up now the festivities are over.
Well, we just moved in round the corner locally, so this is the first year we've lived about here, and yeah, you have to get rid of it somehow, so convenient and easy.
Particularly when you live in like a tenement and you don't have anywhere to drop off your spare trees, you know.
We do it every year, so we used to live near Kilburn Grove Park, so we took them to that one as well, and it's really nice seeing this, smelling all the pine needles.
Around 500,000 of us in Scotland buy a real tree each Christmas, and getting rid of them properly isn't just about saving space in the bin. Throwing one of these trees into landfill instead could end up producing as much as 16 kilos of CO2. But dropping them off somewhere like this, where they'll eventually be chipped up and used again as compost in the park and by locals, can cut that carbon footprint by as much as 80%. At a time of year when we often end up with a lot of excess waste, schemes like this will go some way to making sure our celebrations are more sustainable. Selina Jackson, STV News, Glasgow.
Your late news is just after 10:30, but that is all for now from the STV News teams right across Scotland. Good night.